Now that you know that the European Union can only act insofar as it has received competence from its member states, how can we determine who is competent to exercise the so-called shared competences? It is the member states or the European Union. The principle of subsidiarity gives us an answer to this question by providing that in the policy areas whose competence is shared with the member states, the European Union can only act where action of individual states is insufficient. The default rule is therefore member states' competence. This principle is of no help in case of exclusive competence, such as trade or handling the Eurozone, because in those policy areas, member states have decided to give up their authority. In order to distinguish whether member states or the European Union are entitled to act, we have to ask ourselves who is better placed to achieve the goal pursued by that particular policy. For example, if we are thinking about a measure dealing with the protection of the environment, we should think whether this particular objective is better achieved by a national measure or by a European-wide action. Obviously, the answer to this question depends on the scale and effect that we want to achieve. If we want to deal with an issue such as climate change, an action at the European level is preferable to a national action because the EU-wide measure can have a bigger impact. This is why the emission trading scheme, a cap-and-trade system discussed previously, was enacted by the EU and not by the individual member states. However, the application of subsidiarity often gives rise to serious disputes between the member states and the European Union, as well as between corporations and the EU. Let me provide you an example showing you how subsidiarity works. In 2007, the European Union has introduced a cap on the rate that your operator can charge when you receive and make calls abroad on your mobile. This is called international roaming regulation. Some telecom operators, including Vodafone, Telefonica, and Orange, have challenged this directive. What Vodafone and the other telecom operators claim is that the member states and not the European Union were better placed to regulate the issue, establishing the price you should be charged when you make or receive a call abroad. In their view, the European Union would have breached the principle of subsidiarity. The European Court of Justice rejected this claim. It stated that fixing maximum charges was a justified action in the light of the subsidiarity principle, considering in particular the absence of effective instruments in the hands of national regulators to reach the objective of improving the internal market for telecom operators. In other words, only the EU and not the member states could have solved this issue. This was because the retail prices depend largely on wholesale prices, which, being determined by telecom operators upstream of the consumer markets, they cannot easily be influenced by the national regulators. In other words, the national regulators are powerless vis-à-vis the action of those telecom operators. Therefore, an intervention at the European level was fully justified. Although controversial, the European policy of capping, limiting prices for international call was therefore judged to be in full compliance with the principle of subsidiarity under the EU.